Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you to our panel, which is called Investment Opportunities and De-risking Mechanisms to Mobilize Private Investments. I would like to welcome all speakers participating in this very important panel today. We'll be talking about access to finance, to access also de-risking mechanisms. And de-risking mechanisms are on the top of the priority of Ukrainian government and international players as well. So I would like to briefly introduce our speakers, and please give a short round of applause to everyone. Yulia Sviridenko, First Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, Minister of Economy of Ukraine. Philip Hildebrand, Vice Chair, BlackRock. Scott Nathan, Chief Executive Officer, U.S. Development Finance Corporation. Nobumitsu Hayashi, President of Japan's Bank for International Cooperation. Eric Anderson, Global President, Aon Insurance. Jan Lipavsky, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Czech Republic. Giovanni Salvetti, Rothschild & Co. Stefan Weiler, Head of Debt Capital Markets, JP Morgan. And Olga Sklovskaya, Regional Head for Europe and Central Asia, MIGA. We have seen several significant investment projects that were announced during the war. These were mainly in agri-processing sector and in the sector of construction materials. We have seen institutional players like IFC, EBRD being very active, investing billions of US dollars in Ukrainian economy during the war. We also have seen very active presence of companies and institutions that are present here. Many ideas, many proposals, and already concrete results. So in these sessions today, we don't have much time, so we'll be focusing on announcements, on ideas, and some suggestions, how we can cooperate further, how we rebuild Ukraine in a most effective way, how do we make sure that investors feel comfortable in Ukraine and they believe in Ukrainian future and future of the region and the global world. And I would like to invite First Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, Minister of Economy of Ukraine, Yulia Sviridenko, to give us a brief outline of the investment landscape in Ukraine and what government of Ukraine is doing in order to coordinate the risking mechanisms. And I would like to invite you to the lectern. Thank you.
So do we have the presentation? Good. So it's my honor to address to such estimated audience, and I hope that if there is so big, let's say, request from the audience side to have this discussion on investment, it means that here in the audience we have the potential investors or the current investors. So it's a hope that we were going to have a fruitful discussion on the current investment landscape of Ukraine. So I think that during the full-scale invasion, we are witnessing that Ukrainian economy and Ukrainian business show resilience. And we all understand that our victory is inevitable, so it's very important right now to create opportunities for the investors that are willing to come to Ukraine exactly at the next day after the war will be finished, and to start actually with a preliminary study even right now when the war is still ongoing. So the reconstruction of Ukraine is definitely going to be one of the biggest reconstruction in the 21st century, and it would require enormous resources. I think that all participants of the London conference have already known that the damages estimates in the World Bank R&D report said that it's around 411 billion US dollars that is needed to rebuild. But I would add that these figures does not take into account the damages caused by destruction of the Kakhovka power plant, And there's total anticipated damages of now are at least $1 trillion. Honestly, we understand perfectly well that the core investors are going to be private investors. And private investors are expected to be main, direct and indirect contribution to Ukrainians' recovery. The biggest question that we're going to discuss during these 2 days in London is how to mobilize the private sector, how to encourage companies to come to Ukraine and to start to set up business right now when the war is still ongoing. So I would try briefly to guide you through the investment opportunities that exist and discuss the challenges and show you how we address the bottlenecks that we have and underline the importance of the right incentives and right partnership. So we managed to maintain the macroeconomic stability and establish a productive dialogue with international financial institutions. So we, like a government, set up governmental platform for investment attraction and consolidation of all investment opportunities from local business. It calls Advantage Ukraine, and it's aimed to promote the investment opportunities in Ukraine, doing a profound analysis of investment project. The Advantage Ukraine team saves efforts for international partners and potential investors, filtering only feasible and bankable projects. Private sector, which has demonstrated high resilience and adaptivity since the beginning of the war, it really needs investment. And unfortunately, we cannot let ourselves wait until the brutal Russian war of aggression ends. So we are working right now on faster demining of Ukrainian territory, on restoration of energy. We're working on restoration of housing, as well on deregulation and implementation of effective war risk insurance mechanism, so to be able to create a favorable condition for business climate in our country. So actually, I would provide you with information for the existing government investment stimulating instruments. Probably our current investors knows about investment nanny. So with the support of the Ukraine Invest, Sergei Sivkovich actually is the head of Ukraine Invest, and he can give more information on that. With the support of this instrument, investor can expect exemption from the corporate profit tax, exemption from import VAT payment, exemption from import custom duties, and other benefits. Another instrument that we have on our current investment landscape is investment parks. The companies registered in the industrial parks can benefit from exemption from import VAT and duty on equipment, income tax exemption for 10 years. And of course, we're like a government, understand that Ukraine is an open economy, export-oriented economy, so we are trying to support export-oriented enterprise, and it's also one of the incentives which we offer to our private sector. Ukrainian Credit Agency provides for state guarantee for partial coverage of credit risk of Ukrainian exporters who, when they import foreign equipment for setting up new or modernizing existing production. Of course, we also offer up-to-date, transparent instrument for use of mineral resources, critical and global economy, and complete clarity on an increased variety of utility connection options. Last but not least, we're working on a massive ongoing deregulation, trying to cancel all different types of certificates, licensing. So it's something that we're doing permanently. So now we are introducing new PPP legislation, which will provide more simple and quickest procedure for the implementation of PPP projects. We aim to have all the PPP procurement as transparent as possible. And this is why, together with EBRD, we're developing and implementing the electronic trade system, separate system for PPP. Together with IFC, we have identified potential sectors for PPP implementation, and are gradually moving towards the implementation for specific projects in transport system, in renewable energy, in supplying of schools, public health, and others. So thanks to close cooperation of Ukrainian government with a number of IFIs, DFIs, export credit agency, direct finance and export supporting guarantees are now available for both public and private sector. So approximately, I would say 12 months ago, our government has started thinking about war risk insurance. I endorsed the London Conference framework on war risk insurance for Ukraine announced today. The whole world understands that the risk insurance, it's not the main incentive, but kind of tool that can give the additional comfort to potential investor. Because if you would ask me what is going to be the main incentive for potential investors to come, of course it's gaining the victory and becoming the part of the NATO. So that's why, but I think it should be discussed at another panel. So here we're going to discuss the financial instruments. So we're welcoming all existing options, including but not limited to those planned and underway by MIGA, by DFC, by EBRD, as well as our own national credit agency. Unfortunately for me, and I'm using this panel as a possibility to apply to all our audience, that the existing mechanisms are not enough. MIGA and DFC and EBRD, I would ask as we discussed today, you need an additional capacity. We understand it perfectly well, because we have a pipeline for different investment projects for $1,000, and of course, your capacity is definitely not enough. So that's why I need to think about how we can increase this capacity, or how we can collaborate together, so to create kind of guarantee pool, so to be able to provide this insurance for this company willing to start the reconstruction and recovery even during the wartime. So finally, we're happy to announce that the National Bank of Ukraine has recently liberalized certain foreign currency restrictions and allowed servicing of insurance policies, ECAs and DFIs covered loans. So I don't want to take your time. So last but not least, with support of the presidential office, we are working right now closely on with a BlackRock team towards the establishment of the national DFI. It's for the first time in the history of Ukraine. It will be called Ukrainian Development Fund. I know that JP Morgan also announced that their intention to join the task force and provide its expertise. So we're also welcoming other investment banks and funds from all over the world to become member of its initiative. This fund will be performing the role of the first lost risk taker, underwriting all potential investment deals to become anchor minority equity shareholder, providing the level of comfort to other members of the capital market ecosystem. I hope that everything that I just mentioned about was useful for you, and I truly believe that the becoming of the part of reconstruction of Ukraine today is the most powerful investment in a common future of Ukraine, and not only Ukraine, but of Europe and the globe. And thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, First Deputy Prime Minister. And we have heard about development plans for Ukraine, about investment plans, but reconstruction of Ukraine, or transformation of Ukraine, how we like to call it, because we have to build back better, will require significant amounts of private capital. So now I would like to turn to Mr. Hildebrand, because we know that BlackRock has signed a memorandum with the government of Ukraine to do a national DFI. And yesterday, during presentation at BlackRock, we have seen that this fund will be focused on 5 sectors of Ukrainian economy. So can you share with us latest information about this initiative? What kind of sectors you are planning to cover? So because we have today a wider audience, so it will be, I think, a good thing to repeat that. What is the possible size of investments that you are looking at? And what is the time frame to launch operations? Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for hosting this today. Thank you for the UK for putting on this extraordinary coming together at a critical time. We were fortunate enough to travel to Ukraine and were received by the Deputy Prime Minister, her colleagues, and the President, and saw firsthand just the commitment not only to sustain the efforts ongoing in the war, but to the commitment to rebuild the country, and I think importantly to rebuild the country in a fundamentally new way. And the way certainly all the interactions we've seen is the Development Fund is part of this story. It's not just about rebuilding, it's about rebuilding in a sense in a new way. And if you think about what the problem statement is going forward, it's really the needs of investments, as we all know, are vast. There's no way you can cover this by public money alone. And this is true of many other areas in the world. Think of climate transition, transition finance. So we need to mobilize private capital. What do you need to do that? You need to have a return objective, which in this case means, and the Deputy Prime Minister mentioned it, we have to find ways to reduce some of the risk. This is what blended finance is all about. It's about bringing risk levels essentially back to something like OECD levels so that we can mobilize the large pools of the capital markets to come and meet these investment needs. We need to make sure that there is deal flow at scale. This is a very important part. Money is one thing, but you also need to have the investable opportunities. They need to be assessed. You need to conduct due diligence on them. And then, finally, you need to have governance that is really beyond reproach. And this is something that I was very impressed by the President's commitment in Kyiv to really make sure that this is what we get at the end of this process. And the fund really tries to tackle all three of these dimensions in order to be able to mobilize capital. We have now finished stage one, which is essentially the concept stage, the design stage. We're now heading into phase two, which will be very important around the statutory details, the rules, how is it set up, how is it governed, what kind of people will run the fund, how do we ensure that we have proper governance at the supervisory level, how do we create the mechanisms for the due diligence, for the processing of the deal flow, to make sure that there's plenty of deal flow there for the capital once it arrives. And then, of course, we need to make sure that we can identify the concessional pool of capital, which serves as a risk absorption tranche up front in order to bring the level of risk back down to being able to attract the large pools of capital. We had our first commitment today. I want to mention that and call out to Andrew Forrest, who I think just a few minutes ago made the first commitment of $500 million into the fund. So this is real. And we're now heading into the, thank you. You asked me about the size, just to close perhaps. I know we're all short on time. I think the key is that we set it up, you know the numbers, right? You know the kind of $500 billion in total. Privately investable, we estimate, is probably something like 50 to 60 billion. We would like to get started with concessional capital, perhaps in the order of magnitude of a couple of billion, so that we can start to see a couple of first deals that actually get identified and become real. I think we need to, it's one thing to throw out huge numbers. You need to see actual investments flowing, actual deals made, and to make sure that you have a proof of concept. And then we can come back and scale it further. The one thing I will say is this, to me, is very much a permanent institution. I think the way I've seen the government, but Julia, you have to correct me, is that this is part of the future economic strategy of the country. It's part of a future industrial strategy in many ways, something that all countries are now doing. So I see this very much as an ongoing effort. And of course, it hopefully will be very large. Hopefully 20 years from now, Julia, they will be speaking about this the way we talk about Temasek today in Singapore. That would be a wonderful way to think about it. But we need to start at realistic numbers and start with actual proof of concept by identifying, actual investments. We also need, of course, some perspective for peace, ultimately. This is the other piece. If you want to have the mobilization of, at scale, of private capital. There has to be that perspective, and again, the President was very clear when we met with him that that is an important piece of all this in order for it to work. So it's very exciting work. We're doing this work pro bono. It's about advising the government. This is very much meant to be the Ukrainian Development Fund. This is an effort by the government, for the people of Ukraine. And we and others, JP Morgan, and hopefully in the future, I would like to see some European financial institutions being part of this. We talked about it earlier today. I think it's important that Europe will be a key story of the reconstruction. And we would certainly welcome that if we were to see major European institutions also joining this effort.
Thank you very much. So we see 1 year since there was the first Ukrainian Recovery Conference held in Lugano, and we already have practical results. Big players like BlackRock, they are not only interested in Ukraine, they are entering Ukraine, they are supporting Ukraine. So thank you very much for that. Your expertise, your advice is very important, as well as connections to global investors. But Ukraine also doing its part. And we have seen recent developments. Well, we are limited in terms of what we can do. But, for example, National Bank of Ukraine recently, just a couple of days ago, removed a restriction on repayment of obligations for loans that are provided by ECAs and DFIs. This is something that opens the doors and very important. Also, the Parliament of Ukraine has passed draft law in its first reading that will allow national Ukrainian ECA to provide investment insurance as well. So all these efforts combined, they're very important. But we need to talk to big players in DFI world like DFC. And DFC was active in Ukraine for many years. Thank you very much for that as well. So we have quite a big portfolio already, but it's gonna be building up. You were in Kyiv yourself several times now. And in 2022, you said that there will be a line opened for $250 million that would incentivize Ukrainian industry through banking sector. So it would be great to hear about that initiative, what kind of progress you have made so far, and also about your engagement with other international players in terms of providing donor capital, concessional capital for these initiatives. I mean agencies like MIGA, for example. Thank you.
Sergey, thank you. It's great to be here with such a big and broad panel, and it's great to be on stage with the Deputy Prime Minister, so thank you for the opportunity to talk about what the Development Finance Corporation is doing and hopes to do in the future in Ukraine. Sergey, you're right. When I was in Kyiv back in January, we did talk about our support for financial institutions to do on-lending activity to support small and medium enterprises. These kind of loan guarantees fit into the subject of this panel, a way of de-risking investment. We've already been doing this activity since 2014. We rapidly increased the activity. So in total, across all of our products, we did close to $1 billion of investing in that period. But of course, after February 24th of last year, we not only wanted to support our existing clients, which was very important, but look to generate new leads for projects, new leads for support. And for us, support for small business is a way to keep people employed, keep production up, have companies pay taxes, crucially important for the budget of Ukraine to have people employed and taxes being paid. So we've supported, since the war, Bank Lviv. Today we're announcing that we intend to support them again with another $20 million to be directed toward a loan guarantee of $20 million to be directed toward small and medium enterprises. And we're in discussions with a wide range of banks to broaden out this activity. I think this kind of small business support is crucial. But our activity goes beyond that in the de-risking realm. Today, along with our partners MIGA and the British Investment Initiative in their first investment in Ukraine, we all supported IFC's Global Trade Finance Program. This is crucial to help keep imports coming in and the material that the economy needs to keep growing. For us, this is the first trade finance deal our institution has ever done. So we're stretching to find ways that we can de-risk. For us, this was a $50 million transaction, and we think it will mobilize hundreds of millions of dollars for trade finance. But then, of course, there's political risk insurance. This is a product that DFC and our predecessor agencies have been doing for many decades. In total, the United States has done more than $50 billion of war risk and political risk insurance over the decades. And in Ukraine, the largest part of that $800 million of exposure you mentioned is currently in political risk insurance. It's about $529 million. But we are actively looking for more projects. Today, we announced a collaboration with MIGA to make sure if we could be a reinsurer to help increase their capacity as an insurer against war risk. And we have many leads thanks to Advantage Ukraine, working with your organization, Ukraine Invest, with the American Chamber of Commerce. We've found many avenues to increase our profile, the visibility of what we're trying to do, and get in potential projects. For us, for the mobilization of capital, as the Deputy Prime Minister spoke about, taking that tail risk of potential war risk, expropriation, arbitral default, taking those risks off the table, allow investors to analyze what they're good at, which is the cash flows of an opportunity, run the numbers, see if a project is commercially viable. If we can take that risk off the table that is hard for them to quantify, it should mobilize an enormous amount of private capital. I mentioned we have a little over 500 million of exposure. We certainly have the capacity at the moment to double that exposure, but at a certain point, as the Deputy Prime Minister pointed out, we're going to need to increase the capacity across the system to do this activity. It's going to be crucial to do so. So my bottom line is the Development Finance Corporation, we have been investing in Ukraine for many, many years, for decades. We're investing today. We have a range of projects. I see Lena Kozarny here, along with many development finance institutions. We're very proud to be supporting her Ukraine, her Horizon Capital Growth Fund 4. I think it's a great opportunity. It shows partnership, all of us together. But we were investing before, we're investing today, and we really look forward to continuing to invest in the future.
Thank you very much. We have heard about solid DFC plans, and I would like to address my question to Mr. Hayashi. Mr. Hayashi is the head of JBIC. JBIC is also a very strong international player, development finance institution, and you provide support to many companies throughout the world. I have two short questions to you. In Tokyo, you were hosting platform with EBRD and G7 countries, where you announced multilateral investment platform for Ukraine. What kind of developments, latest developments there, maybe you can mention, and how JBIC can increase support for reconstruction of Ukraine by providing guarantees to IFIs through amendments of your laws or bylaws, internal ones? Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. On your first question, it is official today. We just had a signing agreement with SCOP, with other G7 DFIs and European DFIs, with EBRD, and thanks to the Deputy Prime Minister. We know that financing reconstruction of Ukraine is beyond one institution, whether it's national or multinational. So we want to get together. That's why I hosted the launching event in May in Tokyo, just in time for the G7 summit meeting in Hiroshima. We want to not just reduce the duplicates, but we also maximize our effectiveness, create synergies, and bring about real results on the ground. That's what we wanted to do. On your second question, yes, the government proposed and our Congress approved the amendment to what we can do. And it is focused on Ukraine. We can now give guarantees to what the World Bank or EBRD does for the public business operation. So we are talking with IFC and EBRD how we can really make it realization. And about the modality, what sectors we want to do it. And we very much want to invite Japanese companies because with all due respect to the UK hosting this event and EU unity, this is a global agenda. So we want to bring more Japanese investors and Asian investors as well. And thank you. Yeah, before I finish, let me also talk to what we do as JBIC. We have assisted BGK, the Polish Development Bank, to raise money. Yes, we guarantee the samurai bond issuance. 93 billion yen is going to the Polish Aid Fund, which is to support the medical and social and educational needs for the Ukrainian refugees, to support the women and children who are in Poland that has fled from Ukraine. I yesterday was in Warsaw visiting one of the hotels where the Polish people have generously given the welcome to the people of Ukraine. We want to build on this very special relationship with the BGK and find out what we can do more to support business in Ukraine and in surrounding countries. And I also want to very much welcome the London Conference Framework on War Risk Insurance, which has been pronounced by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Because you mentioned Poland, I cannot avoid that, so I need to say that Polish government is also working on a draft law to introduce system for investment insurance in Ukraine. That will be a significant program. The government of Poland has signed it off already, and it's in the parliament, so we're going to have some good news, hopefully, from Polish parliament very soon. So now I would like to turn to Olga Skolska from MIGA. MIGA is a well-known international player. You mainly insure significant investment projects. You announced your program for Ukraine about a year ago, and since then we have seen some updates in terms of policy, in terms of cover, in terms of your cooperation with investors and donors. So two short questions again. What is the latest status of the program? What kind of achievements you have already received and seen? And what about your cooperation with donors in terms of attracting them to your trust fund? Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sergey. It's a pleasure to be here on this panel with the first Deputy Prime Minister. I was asked not to focus too much on what MIGA does. I was assured everyone knows. I'll just say a few words about how much of MIGA does of what it does. Since MIGA's inception, we have issued 1,000 projects, the 1,000th project very recently, and we've been able to leverage MIGA's capital by more than 10 times to a portfolio of 26 billion right now. The MIGA provides or supports investments into emerging markets through guarantees and political risk insurance. And MIGA's role is particularly important in fragile and conflict-affected countries. And out of our 26 billion portfolio, about 3.5 billion are in fragile and conflict-affected countries. Since Ukraine became member of MIGA, MIGA insured 1.4 billion of investments into Ukraine. And since the start of Russia's invasion, we looked for ways to support the urgent needs of Ukrainian businesses and our existing clients in Ukraine. So until today, actually, MIGA has issued 160 million in guarantees, out of which 10 million was in support of trade finance with the BRD and 100 million of political risk insurance in support of our a long-standing client in Ukraine, a financial institution that provides liquidity and financial services to SMEs and agribusiness sector. But I'm very happy to announce that today MIGA has issued a guarantee of 40.85 million coverage in support of ProCredit, our long-standing client, financial institution that also focuses on SMEs. With that new guarantee, out of which about 24 million euro was incremental, MIGA's incremental coverage since the start of the war is 142 million US dollars. We are actively underwriting several other projects, and by the end of 2023, by the end of this year, we hope to have underwritten around 250 million in insurance coverage spread across trade finance, support for loans to SMEs, and select real sector projects. This would not have been possible without reinsurance. And we are hoping that in some of these new projects, we will be able to have support of our partners on the reinsurance side. Obviously, while these amounts are significant, the need for political risk insurance are massive, both now and in the future. And there are two critical pathways for MIGA to leverage our own capital and underwriting capacity to maximize our impact. The first one is collaboration and through partnerships with DFIs, such as IFC, EBRD, DFC, and others. And today, as Scott mentioned, we have agreed to collaborate and coordinate our respective insurance work in Ukraine. And the second important pathway is reinsurance, which really allows MIGA to scale up coverage for projects. But as you all know, private reinsurance for Ukraine is not available in investment insurance. And so again, collaboration with public reinsurance will be critical. And here again, the consultation and coordination on reinsurance will be very important. Also, to overcome this lack of private reinsurance, MIGA has established a trust fund called SureTF, which was gracefully seeded by the government of Japan, 23 million. But I am also very happy to announce, and as you may have seen, the government of UK has announced support for Ukraine in its contribution of up to 20 million pounds to the Sure Trust Fund. And we have ongoing discussions with a number of donors and hope for more good news on that front. So, I guess in conclusion, the 142 million of guarantees that we have issued so far, we have been able to do it using 28 million in donor funding, which has so far been quite impressive leverage ratio of 1:5, largely, again, as a result of availability of some of the reinsurance that we were able to find. So we would like to thank the governments of Japan and the government of UK for their contribution and look forward to further support for SureTF so that we can support more investments into Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have Alexander Pivovarsky in the room to make an interaction from the floor? Just 2 minutes, please. So EBRD is the biggest institutional investor in Ukraine. During 2022 and 2023 alone, the institution confirmed that they will invest 3.
Sergei, thank you very much.
From Ukraine, because when we talk about insurance, we need to talk about specific programs rather than a broader vision.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sergei, and thank you for bringing us in. We are, in a way, new to war insurance. In fact, it's something that we only started to learn about at Lugano, and also based on conversations we had with you and with Ministry of Economy, with Alexander and other colleagues, Ministry of Economy, since Lugano, to help reflect on what else can be done, what can we do. And as you know, EBRD is focused on the private sector, so our main contribution really is to try to see how we could help reopen the private sector insurance market, focusing on war insurance in particular, and bring in reinsurance. And so what have we been doing so far? Well, first of all, we have been engaging very actively with our partners like MIGA, DFC, and others to make sure whatever we do, we coordinate and we are additional in this work. And we realize that the needs will be enormous because based on the research shows that in most countries that suffered from such brutal war, there will be a lingering period of uncertainty. So whatever we can do to accelerate investment will be needed. And so we specifically have been working with donors to mobilize some support for first loss guarantees that could be used to reopen the insurance and reinsurance market, working with local insurance companies, with potential administrators of this model that we hope to announce sometime soon, and working with the government of Ukraine to make sure there's a policy framework for this to happen. So we hope to focus, as you mentioned, initially on trade facilitation, on cargo, which is, we are also being told by the markets, is the most likely segment that could reopen based on our model, and then we could revisit over time together with other institutions to make sure we could open other segments if there is need and we are still additional. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now moving on to the private sector. Mr. Anderson, you have heard what our distinguished colleagues said from government of Ukraine, from institutions, from big, also private players. And you are the largest insurance broker in Ukraine and throughout the world. So do you think it's enough what government of Ukraine is doing and institutional partners in order to enable you to enter the market with diversified portfolio of programs and products in order to launch investment insurance at a bigger scale? Please, over to you.
So thanks for the question and thanks for the chance to be here with you all. We think about it in sort of two time arcs, right? Because that we have a large operation on the ground that's working today with businesses and communities in the Ukraine already. And there is a functioning insurance market without war or political violence cover, but it's a third smaller than it was a year ago. But it continues to operate and provide traditional products to businesses and communities and individuals. But it needs capital. It needs capital to function, take away the bigger question that we'll get to in a second. It's why we announced today this partnership with VIG, one of the largest insurers on the ground in Ukraine, and Lloyd's, to make sure two things. There is access to capital to continue to do today what is needed in the local market, but also for the Lloyd's market to learn as they begin to rethink how do they approach providing private reinsurance capital for the big topics of political violence and political risk. And then you've got this second question, which has been talked about, a lot today and the days leading up to this, around what does a public-private partnership look like? How do you actually draw in what has been government resources and use it in a way that leverages those resources so that the private market re-enters in a way that it ultimately takes over from the public sector? Because I don't think anybody on this stage wants a permanent solution that is public-driven as opposed to private. So as these are built, and there's a lot of ideas that are being kicked around, and they're all very good, the final structure ultimately, I think, can be pretty flexible. It has to do a couple of things, though, right? It has to risk pool, and it has to share risk today that the private sector has walked away from, just for fear of understanding size of risk, don't know how to price it, et cetera. How do we get them back in? So there's an education component. There is an opportunity to work with the existing insurers on the ground in Ukraine to make sure they have the expertise. They know how to spend the resource and devote the capital to the areas that are most in need, whether it's infrastructure, financial services, manufacturing. I think you all know that. But then ultimately, what's the time base so that over time the private market begins to step in? And you see this in a couple of structures that have been built around the world. You saw it with TRIA after 9/11 in the US. You see Pool Re was an example that was used earlier. Very different structures, but the goal was the same in terms of leveraging private capital behind public balance sheets until the private capital understands the risk and can price it appropriately and gains confidence. So I do think what's happening right now, there is more needed for sure. But I think as we move into this second phase of how do we create this public-private partnership, there is opportunity to build community, to build expertise in Ukraine, supported by private capital outside as it was prior to the war, but in a way that actually drives economic development in the key areas.
Thank you very much, and I hope that you stay in the process and you will be an important voice that will be heard by institutions, by government, in order to mobilize private reinsurance and private companies. We have seen recently a lot of interest from ECAs from throughout the world, from G7, from other countries. They contacted us, for example, Ukraine Invest, and I'm sure that our governmental institutions, they're asking about projects, but we have not seen any significant announcements in 2023, 2022. So from my perspective, they're applying a regular business approach. And it's very hard to apply because we're in the state of the full-scale military invasion. So my question is to our next speaker, to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Czech Republic, Mr. Lipavsky. So do you think diplomats, ministers of foreign affairs, can actually influence this and explain the impact that is needed for Ukraine right now in order for ECAs to open up and to show those first examples, of ensuring investments in Ukraine? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing this conference. And yes, it is our role to lead the way and to pave the way. And I think it's a role of diplomacy to organize such events where people can meet and discuss. And the question is always, what is the result of such a conferences? And I think it's clear if you look at the first conference in Warsaw, then go to Lugano, then here in London, and next one should be in Germany, if I'm right. Every time we do a progress as a community, as an international community, helping Ukraine in future prospects. First of all, a lot of things has been done. Look, the Council of Europe agreed to have a register of damages. We have a serious debate on how to work with frozen assets. And slowly we are moving to a situation when I'm sure that those assets could be used for rebuild of Ukraine. Look, this debate, I could not imagine this kind of debate 1 year ago on how insurance companies and state-owned insurance companies will provide a service for business to do trade with Ukraine. I would like to announce that in a few weeks, the Czech Republic will have a scheme for insurancing trade exports to Ukraine. So our companies will be able to trade almost as usual. And we will join the club of countries which are already doing so. So it will be the Czech National Guarantee and Insurance Agency. We have a business, Czech-Ukraine Business Club, full of companies wanting to do business and participating, and to participate on rebuilding of Ukraine. But politically, from my perspective as a Czech Minister of Foreign Affairs, for Ukraine to be member of the EU, it's a way how to reconstruct Ukraine, because Ukraine will be part of all important legal frameworks. There will be guaranteed rule of law. A lot of reforms in important areas will definitely happen. And of course, it will take some time. But even the work on that will help to Ukraine to rebuild. And same goes for NATO membership, which it's something which Ukraine is striving for, and you have our support. The security will be guaranteed. So every little step matters. And that's the role of diplomats to be very short and concise.
Thank you very much, and we count on your support as well, between the conferences to push this agenda, and to make sure that ECAs will be more active in terms of providing these programs. Going back to private sector, Rothschild, Giovanni, thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much for doing business in Ukraine for many years. Your portfolio is over tens of billions of dollars in Ukraine, so you did many deals. From what you've heard today, same kind of question that I have asked Mr. Andersen. Is that enough to create investment vehicles, this kind of support? And what are your current plans in Ukraine? Maybe some deals or initiatives that you can announce? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting, and thank you for the question. And dear participants, I'm fully aware I'm one of the last speakers at the end of a very long day, so I'll try, and one separating you probably from your dinner or drink, so I'll be as concise as possible. And you're right, actually, we have been advising exactly on $53 billion in Ukraine in the last 15 years. That means we have advised on, let's say, 80%. We have been involved somehow in 80% of a transaction which took place in the market. And besides, allowing me this to boast a little bit now, I'm sorry for that, I think the consequence of this is that we know quite directly, we have access to insights of what investors want and what they're looking for. So all this is very interesting. But I think to be too general, there is a risk to be too general. We need to distinguish a little bit different type of investors which are looking at Ukraine now. I see three types of investors which are looking at Ukraine at the moment. You have super speculative investors, people which are investing in papers and they want to triplicate, double their money in 1 year. These people don't need anything of what you are preparing. They already invested 5 days after the war started, hundreds of millions of dollars, and they double, triple the money as we speak. And I mean, it's not bringing anything to the country, but I think it's relevant to note that even during hot period of time, there have been hundreds of millions of dollars flowing in Ukraine. The second category of investors are what I would call the brave investors, investors which are prepared to invest before the war, but we are undecided. And clearly there are a lot of risks, and they are not so speculative as the first ones. And on this category, I think we can work, and I'll get to that in a second. The third category of investors ready to look into Ukraine are mainstream investors. And for this, I think is going to be quite difficult, because normally they require three things. First, safety, personal safety. Second, macroeconomic outlook stable. And third, a very solid rule of law. Now, the first two, until the war is there, do not exist. The third, as we know, is good work in progress, but still not done. So I think we should focus on the one which are ready now to take the risk. I'm currently working, as you asked, on 3 transactions in excess of $100 million of investors which are ready to consider investing in Ukraine in the next month, not before it is over. Not in papers, not in bonds, in real assets. So they cannot buy and sell. They need to take a long-term view. And they are undecided, obviously. And I think it would be extremely helpful if we could use some of this statement to, let me say, combat testing one or two of these specific situations and to see if we can really unblock. Because, sorry to say, if there is one big deal which we can splash on the first page of the Financial Times, it's worth as 2,000 slides and promotions, conferences as well. So I think I would really ask if it's, for instance, starting from DFC, if you have, I'm happy to sit with you tomorrow and tell you in detail. And I'd like to conclude, because I know it's time, I'd like to say just one thing. I think in this year and a half, our Ukrainian friends have taught us many things. The one I think is very valuable is that the bravery is contagious, not only in defending your homeland, but also in business. We need to get 1 or 2 case studies, and I'm sure that we can create a stream. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Moving on to JP Morgan. Stefan, thank you very much again for doing business in Ukraine. You were there for many years. You were raising capital for state and private players in Ukraine. Now we have seen you being active in terms of bringing more private capital into industry as well. We have heard about your cooperation with BlackRock, Ukrainian Development Fund. It will be interesting to hear about that. And also about creation of new investment vehicles for Ukraine. So what is your view? Again, is that enough? What Ukraine is doing, institutional partners are doing for you to be more active in Ukraine? And what is the latest update since you met Prime Minister, President of Ukraine and Prime Minister of Ukraine this year? What are the latest announcements, maybe, achievements? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you, for the question. You're right, we've been very privileged in that we've had a very long-standing relationship with Ukraine before the war, and now we're very proud to have it during the war. We have built our relationship mainly on raising financing pre-war. We've been working a lot more on preserving liquidity for priority needs during the war so far with the restructuring work of the existing debt, which has saved billions of dollars. And more recently, and while there need to be more restructurings going forward, and I think it's also worthwhile to say that Ukraine and I admired this, you know, for a long time, has always understood the importance of private capital, you know, for the country. This was prior to the war, and also immediately as the war broke out. I remember Ukraine stepping in front of investors within 2 weeks of February 24th, updating investors on what's happening. So that's, I think, a great sign and example of how Ukraine is looking at private capital. We've been, you know, we've had many touch points in Ukraine across the government and many of the partner institutions here. So you've mentioned, you know, BlackRock as one, which, you know, Philip has already described, you know, what the intention and the purpose of the Ukraine Development Fund, the Recovery Fund is. We were very glad to accept to partner with BlackRock in February after we met the president, and we enjoyed working with the BlackRock team and McKinsey there. And we you know, look forward to the work ahead, and hopefully we can convince especially the official sector and IFI institutions to seed the fund, right? It's a vehicle that we are creating to multiply and attract private sector capital, right? It is there. It may not be a preference for some institutions, but it's a vehicle that can be very, very effective. We've been trying to look at financing opportunities across different sectors, across different partners. There's been some success, and clearly it's challenging during times of war. It's important to be creative, and we've had, as I said, there have been some small success. So there's a contribution with each of every trade towards the bigger number that has been stated in the conference. But it is modest progress, right, towards achieving that financing objective. And, you know, I was listening to the first panel, which was a very impressive panel, I thought, and delivered many important messages. I think one of the main ones, or the most impactful statements, was from the president of the EU Commission, and the fact that the EU is looking to confiscate some of the assets that have been frozen from Russia. I think she talked about interests so far, but maybe that can stretch also to principle. And this is an opportunity also to be creative and think about financing structures that can front load, you know, some of those flows, those interest flows. I think she talked about, you know, maybe these are 3 billion of interest payments that would flow over 4 years each time. You know, if it's structured correctly, you can raise 12 billion up front, right, and have funding that Ukraine needs now rather than later on in the process. So these are maybe some examples of what we have to think about, what we have to do together. And it's been, you know, for JP Morgan a great privilege to be part and be in Ukraine's corner. And lastly, I'd like to highlight that we are also looking to support the housing sector in Ukraine. We are, just after this panel, we'll be signing a memorandum of understanding with the Ukraine Financial Housing Company. This is in an effort to structure and allow for the entity to scale itself and to support the housing sector and access ultimately capital markets, maybe in form of covered bonds or securitization. So this is something, another project that we will be focusing on near term.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to wrap up quickly. So thank you very much to our distinguished speakers, you know, for giving these excellent presentations, well, speeches, let's say that. But they were important because you conveyed messages. You announced things that has been already done. This is definitely not the beginning, but that's definitely not the end as well, because we still have to make a lot, you know, in order to make Ukraine prosperous, to develop, and to make the world safer and more sustainable in terms of development. One key thing that I want to convey to the room, 2 words: deal flow. So we need to have more deals from Ukrainian businesses and international businesses. I would like to remind you one of the cases when President of Ukraine, he was talking to international partners at the beginning of the war. And what he said that war in Ukraine is not a cinema. You cannot just buy popcorn and watch. you have to participate, you have to help Ukraine, you have to be engaged. So I think same one goes to investors, to industry. Come to us, talk to us, think about doing business in Ukraine, and we'll be happy to support you, government of Ukraine, and all our distinguished international partners. So let's create that deal flow that will be supported by finance, insurance, and all other mechanisms that are important for investments in Ukraine. So please, a big round of applause to our distinguished speakers for what they do in Ukraine. Thank you.